The sound started like a distant drum. Then it became a roar. Steel doors slammed. Voices rose and broke into shouting. Windows rattled. Men ran. Smoke curled up from a building where fire should not be. 4 hours, the Ohio State Penitentiary at Lucasville felt like a city under attack, only this city was full of prisoners and guards and danger close enough to touch. At the very center of that chaos stood a courtyard where rival gangs had joined together. They were not friends. They were not allies by choice. They were angry, frightened, and ready to fight. The riot had begun as a protest over a small rule change, but it had become a war. That war burned for 5 days. When it finally ended, 10 men were dead, dozens were hurt, and large parts of the prison were badly damaged. On the second night, as flames glowed behind thick windows and the air smelled of smoke and fear, a tower guard called into his radio with the voice of a man who had seen too much. "We have men on the roof," he said. "They're moving fast. We've lost the yard. They're pushing through the wing. We need help now." Then a shout cut the transmission short. The radio squawked and died. People on both sides realized something terrible was happening. The riot was bigger than anyone expected, and it was not stopping. The worst moment in Chapter 1, the high peak, is right here, when the gangs come together and the control room loses power, and smoke fills the air. Guards are forcing doors closed. Inmates are using anything they can find to block hallways. Someone yells that hostages have been taken. The sound of the riot grows louder, and the scene ends with a single, terrifying cliffhanger. Someone at the warden's office hears a shouted voice over the telephone, a voice that is clear and calm and says 3 words the whole building cannot forget. "We will not leave." Then the line cuts dead. Everything holds for a breath. The smoke moves like a curtain. The warden picks up the phone and dials, but there is no answer. Outside, men shout. Inside, the lights flicker. And the chapter breaks, leaving everyone, guards, journalists, families, and viewers, asking the same question. What will happen next? Now, to understand how a rule change could make a prison explode like this, we must go back to the start. We must see how Lucasville, the people inside it, and the long tensions between groups led to a riot so big it made national news. Lucasville is in Southern Ohio. The prison was built to hold men who had committed serious crimes. It had tight fences, tall towers, and guards who watched day and night. Many of the men inside had been there a long time. They knew each other's stories. They knew who was dangerous and who tried to stay quiet. They knew how the rules worked and how they could be used. Tensions at Lucasville had been growing for months. Small things mattered. Food portions. Chapel times. A guard's tone. The prison had many gangs and groups, white prisoners, black inmates, and other groups with different beliefs and codes. In the months before the riot, there were small fights and threats. One group would be moved for safety reasons. Another would accuse the guards of picking favorites. Anger stacked on anger. Words piled up like kindling. In early April 1993, the prison officials tried a change they thought would calm things. They announced new rules about how inmates could get access to the prison chapel and religious services. Some people would have to sign up in advance. Some visits would be moved. On paper it was only a small change, a way to keep things orderly. In practice, it touched something deep. A group of inmates, many with strong religious beliefs, felt the new rule was unfair. They called themselves by different names. Many followed a Muslim-based belief system combined with other ideas. They believed the chapel was a place for prayer and safety. They argued that being moved from chapel or being told to schedule time would hurt them badly. The prisoners called for a meeting. They wanted to talk to the warden. They wanted their voices heard. The warden had a full day of meetings and thought the request could wait. Some officers thought a small protest could be handled. No one realized how quickly anger could spread. At first, the protest looked quiet. Men gathered in the yard. Some sat in small groups with folded arms. Some stood in the sun and spoke in low voices. But people outside the circle began to watch. Members of other groups came to see what was happening. Word spread along the housing units like lightning. Then, a small fight broke out in one wing, not about the chapel, but about disrespect. Someone felt insulted. Men stepped forward. One punch landed. In a minute, there were shouts. Doors slammed. Men began to push against cell bars. In the mess hall, pots were overturned. In the workshop, benches were thrown against doors. Smoke from a small fire in a trash can began to rise. What the guards called a protest became a disturbance. The warden called for extra officers. He asked for the emergency team to come. But reinforcements were slow. Lucasville is in a rural part of Ohio. The nearest backup could take time. Inmates knew this. They also knew the prison's layout. They had learned where the cameras had blind spots and where old maintenance tunnels ran. The fighters started moving quickly. They blocked doors from the inside, using beds and furniture. They took control of whole wings. Some inmates carried homemade clubs. Others used ropes to move quietly from one area to another. Guards tried to retake the wings, but they were pushed back. The loudspeakers that usually called men to meals played only static. On the first night, the situation was chaotic and fast-changing. News crews outside saw smoke and heard sirens. Friends and family of prisoners gathered near the gates, frightened and angry and seeking answers. Inside, men took what they could find for weapons and shields. Those who wanted to avoid trouble hid. But a leader always rises in moments like this, not one man, but a cluster of men who could speak and plan and move others. During the riot, rival gangs who usually fought one another joined hands for a time. Why? Because the prison chaos threatened everyone. If the guards regained control with force, they might punish many people. If the riot burned out of control, lives would be lost across groups. So men who normally fought decided they had a common need: survive and bargain. They banded together, sometimes out of fear, sometimes out of strategy. This joining of rivals made the riot more dangerous. With more men working together, they could hold larger areas. They could control movements of prisoners and guards. They could form human barriers. They could take hostages. And, tragically, they did. On day 2, some inmates grabbed guards and would not let them go. Others forced officers to strip to be insulted or to hand over keys. The control room had trouble seeing what was happening in some areas. Some men moved along the roofs. That was when the guard on the tower radioed the warden, "They're on the roof. We've lost the yard." The news spread like a fire. Families listening to updates heard about hostages and fires and men who had been injured. The state government moved to respond. A tactical team and state police were called in. Negotiators were sent to talk with prisoners. They hoped to keep the number of injured low and to free any hostages. Some men who had been in prison a long time remember riots like weather, storms that come, shake everything, and then pass. But this one was different. The men had time and a plan. They used the tunnels, they learned how to throw radios off air, and they knew which doors would be hardest to force. They used the prison's old systems, locks, hoses, and mess hall machinery, as tools. Buildings designed to keep people in could be used by those inside to move in secret. One morning, a negotiator entered a wing under a flag of truce. He spoke to a group that had control of a block and asked for the release of hostages. The prisoners listed demands: better treatment, certain transfers, review of the chapel rule. They also asked that no one be punished harshly if they surrendered. The negotiator promised to take their list to the warden and to bring answers. For a while it seemed the riot might end with words and signatures. But mistrust is heavy in prisons. Prisoners feared promises would be broken. Guards feared being put back in harm's way. Outside, the governor and the attorney general watched the TV coverage and worried about the precedent a long riot would make. The real turning point, the extreme event that closes Chapter 1, came when a group of inmates set fire to a building inside the prison. The flames shot up through vents and sent thick black smoke down corridors. The smoke made it hard to breathe. Firefighters outside readied hoses, but the flames were inside a strong building and heavy doors blocked access. Guards, who until now had tried to move carefully and protect hostages, suddenly had to save lives. Men scrambled to open doors while others fought through heat to reach those trapped by smoke. The sound of wood and plastic collapsing added a terrifying soundtrack to the shouts. In the middle of the firefight, a news helicopter hovered, and the live cameras showed columns of smoke rolling into the sky. Viewers saw men on rooftops and shadows moving against the flames. The governor promised a full investigation and said state forces would put an end to the riot. But the fires changed the terms. Where negotiation seemed possible, now the danger was immediate. People could die if the smoke spread. Hostages were being killed by smoke and heat more quickly than laws or deals could move. The tactical teams accelerated plans. The state ordered a stronger intervention. At the end of the chapter, as fire spread and men shouted and the control systems failed, a negotiator runs from a wing carrying a small childlike object, the symbol of a broken hope, a ripped piece of cloth used as a flag of surrender. He holds it up and shouts for an end to the fighting. For a few seconds, it seems like it might work. Then, a loud crash. The wall of one building gives way from the heat and the pressure. Flames roll into the courtyard. Men scream. Someone yells that the hostages are gone. Whether dead or escaped, No one knows yet. The chapter stops there, with the fire roaring, the smoke thick, and voices screaming into the night. 10 lives will be lost before the riot is over. Buildings will be ruined. People's lives will be changed forever.